Back to Jacob's Book Corner. I am Jacob, and this is a book corner, and today we are reading A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas in a spoilerly filled vlog. These are going to be very similar to the ones that I did for Throne of Glass, which I'll link the playlist in the cards in case you want to see my whole entire experience. Those videos range from 30 minutes to like an hour and 10 minutes, so I don't really know where these ones are going to stand. I have a feeling with A Court of Thorns and Roses in particular, because this is a reread for me. I read this back in 2016, and it kind of stuck with me. I pretty much remember a lot of it, and it's being very foretelling of what's happening. I don't know how I'm going to do the updates for this first one. I don't know if we're going to update 25%. I don't know if I'm going to update when I have something interesting to say. I'm not really sure yet. For this first one, we're going to update you at the 10% mark, because that was the original plan, and it just seemed like either too much is happening in between the 10%. I don't really know yet. We will see as we find out. That being said, let's go ahead and jump into the book. I have little post-its on the side here of different things, different topic points. So this is where the spoilers do begin, in case you've never read this before. So we start off with her in the woods. The main character's name is Freya, and she sees a wolf. She kills a deer, and she sees a wolf. Wolves in this world could be fairies. It's not very clear if it is a fairy or not. She believes it is not a fairy, but she shoots it with a arrow. Okay, it's called an ash arrow, and these are supposedly helping to take down fairies. Other things that could help take down a fairy are like silver or silver bracelets, silver things, those type of things. She ends up taking back the wolf to her town, her little village. That's how chapter 1 ends. There is a lot of info dumping in chapter 2. In my opinion, just to give you a heads up. So for instance, she gets engravings that are supposed to be filled with magic, or that would possess with magic, claiming that he had some like high fae blood ancestry, and the wood carvings meant nothing. She tries to sell them later on in this very chapter. Then we learn about oaths. Oaths in this world, at least to her and her family and things, are never ending. They never die. And so her mother on her deathbed made an oath that she had to take care of her entire family. Very Hunger Games-esque, in my opinion. She is the middle or the youngest of 3 siblings, and she also has a dad. The other ones are Elaine and Nesta. Nesta and her don't get along at all. Elaine's very quiet. They don't believe that they were in poverty because originally they weren't, and then her dad ended up losing everything. Now they live in this like old shack. He got hurt, which is the reason why they lost all their fortune, and the only person who took care of him was, or who stayed with him, I should say, would be Freya. Everybody else got up and left and was like, fuck you, and moved on. And like, for instance, Nesta really blames her father for the causing. They end up getting into a bit of a fight about a bunch of different things, one of those being that Nesta is going to be getting married to Thomas, and she's really against this. They also don't do their chores, but like, what's the difference here? Nothing really has been upon this, except for the fact that she ends up breaking this promise, which is what sets the whole story off. But nothing else has come about, like, promises. So I'm really curious. That's something I, like, completely forget. I'm really curious to see if promises are of note. Also, she is human. I mean, that is also something really different from like Throne of Glass alone. She is a human. She has no supernatural abilities. She's good with a bow. She's good with cutting things up. But that's just about it. And we learn about the Children of the Blessed. Children of the Blessed is a cult-like religion that believe nothing but fairies and believes highly of fairies. Everybody else is against fairies. Everybody else doesn't want anything to do with them. And Children of the Blessed, it's like, no, fairies are my shit. You are my shit, fairy. Come over here and take me. Like, that's essentially what they are. And so there's a few pages about them, but that's essentially kind of what they do. And they'll come to the town during market days and spread their gossip and trying to convert people, just like, you know, religions do. So then we learn a little bit about fairies. So one of theirs in this like council, right, the Children of the Blessed, one of theirs went into the world of Prythian, and they all believe that she died, and they're like, no, she was like a blessed, she's living happily, her life is perfect now. They are naming off different things that could have happened. Freya said, or worse, I thought if a high fae truly was involved, spiriting a human into Prythian. I never encountered the cruel human looking high fae who ruled Prythian himself, or fairies who occupied their lands, with their scales and wings and long and spindly arms that could drag you deep beneath the surface of a forgotten pond. I don't know which one could be worse. So that's our first like little hint of what fairies could be and what they could look like. Then we met a mercenary who could pop up later, which is why I want to take note of it. They're really fucked up. They end up buying the pelt. So that's all really we're going to say about it. They spent a lot of money on it, and also there's like this thing of being like, someone helped me out when I was younger, so I want to do my favor and my blessing, and so she chose her to do her blessing. And then we also learned that there was a treaty at one point forged 500 years ago, but the upper class could afford higher swords like this woman to guard their lands bordering the immortal realm. It is an illusion of comfort, just as the markings of our festivals were. We all knew deep down there was nothing to be done against the fairies. We've all been told it regardless of class or rank from the moment that you're born. The warning sung whole 9 yards, right? Also learned that they believe that fairies are escaping over into our land through the forest, kind of where she was at. We learned more information. Once long ago, for millennia before, we had been slaves to the high fae overlords. Once we had built them glorious, flowing civilizations from our blood and sweat and built them temples to the pharaoh gods. Once we had rebelled across every land and territory, the war had been so bloody, so destructive, that it took 6 mortal queens, crafting the treaty for the slaughter to seize on both sides for the wall to be constructed. The north of our world conceded to the high fae and fairies who took their magic with them. The south, so we covering markings forever forced to scratch out a living from this earth. Super duper interesting, more like back lore. Just take note of in case it pops up later. That way I have it. Alright, moving on to chapter 4. That's right. I think we have one more chapter to cover. That she and Isaac, another boy from their town who's married now, have been hooking up secretly for the past like 2 or 3 years, and they end up hooking up at the end of this chapter. It's just really petty sex. This is really what it's referred to. No love is in the air. And they end up going home, and then they hear burst into a enormous crowd, and a shape appeared in the doorway, who we soon learn is there to look for a murderer. We learn this by him shouting, "Murderer!" Then he's asking who murdered him, who murdered, and he's like, "Who are you looking for?" And he explained the wolf that she had shot in the eye and then gutted and then sold. And then we learn that the payment that is demanded, because she confesses that it was me, would be the one of the treaties who marked their lives 500 years ago. I don't really know if that's fair. Maybe we should revise. And we also learn that a part of that treaty is a life for a life. Any unprovoked attacks on fairy kind by humans are paid by a human life in exchange. And he says, here's the thing, I could offer you something different. So the difference is that she could be willing enough to go into Prithian with him and live on his lands, and everybody around her is telling her, take the deal, take the deal. She eventually does take the deal, and the last thing I want to take note is what her father told her. So essentially she is thinking of every other way to escape. Get there, get across, or whatever, to escape these lands, to escape this torture that could be upon her, right? And so we learn that he says that you're always too good for here, too good for us, too good for everyone. If you ever escape, ever convince them that you paid your debt, do not return. And he's like, don't ever come back. You go somewhere new. You make a new name for yourself. Which is very, very interesting. Obviously, this is a romance between her and this, like, fairy god thingy. So, like, that's not happening. Also, one last thing to take note of before we hop off here is the fact that I can totally see Beauty and the Beast vibes. I didn't see it the first time I read it, but it's so Beauty and the Beast coded. It's ridiculous. And I think only the first book is Beauty and the Beast coded because, like, for instance, we're going to soon learn that, like, there's masks involved in things and they were cursed. And so, like, it's just so Beauty and the Beast coded, which is just something so fascinating. I remember the ending not being very Beauty and the Beast coded, but, like, the whole, like, I'm pretty sure the whole book, she's a painter. Like, it's just fascinating. I'll tell you when I'm a bit further into the story and I have a bit more to talk about. Chapter 5 was the journey to. We know it's 2 days she ends up getting knocked out towards the end. We also learn a little bit more about what they have been told over and over again about the High Fae and High Lords and stuff, such as they have no idea. That's really what it is. They just don't really know what Prithian could look like. Some people say it's enormous islands. Other people say it's just sea. Other people say it's like floating worlds. Like, no one really knows exactly what Prithian is. And so that was like one of the things I took note of. But that was the only thing I took note of in Chapter 5. Chapter 5 was super short. Chapter 6 is where we kind of get a little more bulkier. We get introduced to the castle. We get introduced to everybody wearing masks. Once again, those Beauty and the Beast retelling vibes coming in. We also get introduced to some characters. One, we learn the character that she had shot's name is Andreas. He is dead. And we also learn a character named Lucian, who I've heard many of the time. Lucian starts out being really kind to her until he realizes why she's there. And he turns into a massive dick because, well, she murdered his friend. And then she is taken away by a girl who's also in a mask named Alias, who dresses her, plucks her, does all those fun stuff that we all know and love. And that's where we're ending, as she's going to a dinner with the high hair. So I'll talk to you in 2 more chapters. So we're starting in chapter 9, about midway through. So there's a mention of someone who is more powerful than like a queen. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the main villain or something along those lines, just for the simple fact that Sarah does enjoy having a villain of a queen. Normally there is a man who's worse, but queen at front, at least for a little bit. Learning a little bit more information about the world and the lords and stuff. Nothing to take super big note of. Something else to take note of is that the High Fae don't have specific powers the way the lesser fairies do. I don't have a natural ability if that's what you're you're asking. I don't clean everything in sight or elude morals every death or grant you answers to whatever questions you might have. If you trap me, we exist just to roll, which gave her the idea of trapping something possibly that could answer every question, such as how to get out of the deal. Moving on to chapter 10, we learn about the bog. The bog is something that's in the woods, and if you look at it, it can kill you. If you don't, it cannot. It's supposed to be a really bad thing, as this is something, as soon as Tamlin found out about it, he went to go hunt it down. So my best guess is that he's been hunting it for a while now. Then we have a short scene where she thinks she sees her dad. It's another creature that could murder her. Instead, she has a conversation with Tamlin, who reassures her again that she has officially done her vow to her mother, which I feel like this is the great point for the story to really begin. I think there's like some, inklings and stuff. To be honest with you, for a romance novel, it's very light, but I do think the first book is probably going to be mostly of inks anyways. I'm not really expecting much more. For the world, I do have to say it's a little bit boring. There isn't a lot going on. We're only 105 pages in. Super early in the book for me to say it's boring, in my opinion. That being said, I'll update you guys in a few more chapters or a few more little points for me to talk about. Alright, her and Tamlin have had a few cute moments. We also got the bandage up scene. Oh my gosh, I'm seeing so much of, outside of like the actual Fae world building, so much of Beauty and Beast in here. It's crazy to me. I don't remember if she ends up with Tamlin. That's a fun little fact. I don't remember where this is going. I mean, I do partially remember where this is going, but I don't really remember. We learned a few bits of information though. Let's go back to the early 100 pages. 114. I'm just gonna talk briefly. I'm not gonna read you passages because we could be sitting here for the next like 10 minutes reading passages, as we all do know how she likes to point out her info dumping. You know what I mean? This is a cool newer way. Freya ends up upon a set of paintings. These paintings, super intriguing. It's how the world became to be, how Prythian came to be, the story of Prythian. She can't read it all because there's some like ancient words and stuff she doesn't know in here. I'm looking for the good stuff. So there's different territories. They're marked and colored, some with inaccurate, ordinate descriptions of being who had once ruled over the lands and now belonged to the humans. All of it I remembered with a shudder. The next one is the battle between fairy and human, which was pretty cool. So then another map popped up with the much reduced fairy realms. So this is a little bit later on. Northern territories have been cut up and divided to make room for the high fae who had lost their lands on the south of the wall. Everything north of the wall went to them. Everything south was left to blurb nothing, indiscriminate, forgotten world, as if the painter could be left bothered who rendered it. There's also several different territories which are talked about. So for instance, she knows that she's in the Spring Court. There's 6 southern courts in Prythian, an occupied patchwork of territories. Autumn, summer, and winter were easily enough to pick out. The above them 2 glowing courts, the southernmost one a softer, redder palette, and the dawn court above in a bright golden yellow and blue, the day court. And above that, perched in the frozen mountains, spread darkness and stars, sprawling massive territory of the night court. I'm going to have to assume that we're going to be exploring these courts, which is the only reason why I'm mentioning it here, is why I introduced them if we're not going to explore them. He ends up coming and talking to her. They have a little bit of a conversation as well. She also, like I said, ends up cleaning his wound after he kills the bog, and then he also shows her to what would be the study. He also shows her there. He also offers to write a note home to her, which I thought was really sweet. We learn that she has enacted a plan to go hunt down one of these creatures that cannot tell lies. She goes and she reenacts one of those plans, and I have a little bit to read from their conversation as well. This is going up to page 129. Sorel is what it's called. Across the violent western sea, there is another fairy kingdom called Hybern, ruled by the wicked, powerful king. Yes, a king, he said it. Brown, not a high lord. There, his territory now divided in courts. There he is law unto himself. He no longer resists that realm, though his throne is made of their bones. For some time now, King of Hybern had found himself unhappy with the treaty, the other ruling of high fae of the world who made with you humans long ago. The identity was forced to sign it, to let his slaves go, and remain confined to his damp green isle at the edge of the world. And so hundreds of years ago he dispatched his most trusted and royal commanders, his deadliest warriors, remnants of the ancient armies that he once sailed to the continent waged such a brutal war against. Ye humans, all of them are hungry and vile as he. As the spies of the countries and lovers, they entrained various high fae courts and kingdoms and empires around the world for 50 years. And yet when they gathered enough information, he made his plan. But nearly 5 decades ago, one of his commanders disobeyed him, the deceiver. That's all we learned from that. We also learned Tamlin is the high fae of the Spring Court, which which was shocking to her. I somehow did remember that. I thought that was already information to our ears. And it's not. That's what I got for you. Update you. So, coming here with it's a big update. It's not a small one. Sorry, editing Jacob. We're going from 136 to 202 worth of content to cover. First thing, okay, so we're starting back to where she got attacked by the Naga. Hamlin is the one who ends up coming and taking her, and she has this realization with him that maybe that even though he is someone who's killed, she's also killed. So maybe he isn't so much the beast that she thinks he is. That was one of the things that I had marked. Good lines there. And we had, with Asurio, I have, like, all the information, which I don't really like. As a common thing that I'm happy that it seems like Sarah goes away from in her writing, which is repeating and, like, really showing the audience what the information that we had already learned is, as if we're idiots. That's, like, a common thing in this book, which is fine. It's pretty easy accessible because of it, but I do find it somewhat annoying. We learned about Wicked Kings and their comrades and however they tied into the High Lord at my side in the Blight. She learns that she still doesn't have enough information and she just knows that she needs to stay by his side to survive. We also learn a little bit more about the High Fae and how they age. In some cases, High Fae can take hundreds of years to fully become full grown. In other cases, fairies can age like normal, like a human. That was one of the things I took note of for, like, I don't know, like it could pop up. We also learn that they can lie. She just makes her go through like a huge brain fart. Like, what? You can lie? Oh shit, what are you telling the truth about? That was like a big thing. We also learned that fairy and humans did work together at one point. They had aided one each other in the original war. Taylor makes a comment of being like, how do you think we survived for so long? Which I thought was pretty good. We continue onward. She's feeling much more comfortable in this place and she's feeling much more comfortable with them. She ends up realizing Tamlin comes in with a hurt fairy. The fairy is blue, has pointy ears. I feel like it's very distinct and it's a very different fairy. They are dying on the table. They go back and forth for quite a bit. The fairy had wings. I think this is the first set of fairy that I've ever seen Sarah write about that has wings. And I'd like to meet more of them because I'd be so curious what that looks like and what that means. That intrigued me quite a bit. I don't think a lot of fairies, especially in literature, especially romantasy, I don't find them a lot with wings. So if you have any good wing recommendation romantacies, let me know in the comments. He ends up dying. They both end up comforting. I really like the scene. I thought like it brought a lot of good character development to Freya herself. And then Tamlin ends up burying him, which I also think brings really good stuff towards Tamlin. This also brings them together super close. Lucian also, we see a more vulnerable side of Lucian in this. So we also learn about Lucian and who he was in his past. He had fallen in love with a woman that his father, who was a High Lord, did not typically agree with. So the father and the brothers ended up doing horrible things. This woman murdering her in front of Lucian. Lucian and Tamlin ended up getting the revenge on the brothers, not so much the king himself or the High Lord himself, but that was one of the things, and I felt like it was very important to take note of. We learned a little bit more about Freya. This was during when they're swimming for the first time in like it's like a water that's like starlights and stuff, and they're talking. He asked a little bit about her dad, and one of the things that she mentioned is that my father was once called the Prince of Merchants. This was someone that he would sell a lot. They were really wealthy at one point. Then he ended up, he lied and he got into some gambling debts and stuff. His leg ended up being really injured, and then she ended up having to take over and try to survive for their family. I like Tamlin's response here where he's like, it really sucks that like your family doesn't pay attention to how much you did for them. Even, they just didn't seem like they cared. She becomes comfortable enough wanting to paint, and she begins to paint. This eventually turns into paranoia though, because there's lots of time that has passed since the time she started painting, which represents like maybe they're lying to her, maybe they're trying to get her to look at things differently for whatever the reason, and she's still not sure what the point here is. We also found the Rose Garden, which is another Beauty and Beast reference. There's so many now that I know this is Beauty and Beast coded. It's crazy. He wrote her poems, which I thought was kind of cute. And then we learn a little bit about his life as well. His father was almost, if not worse than Lucian. His mother was maid to him, and so they were forced in together. His mother did love him. They were murdered, and so he became the High Lord. I liked some of the other funny things, such as like, oh, I could play a mean fiddle. I thought that was quite a funny line. He didn't want to become the High Lord, and so he decided to become a lawyer, which is why he's so talented in things such as brutality and violence. When we talk about Fire Knight or Kamani, I'll read a few things of what that means eventually. Their relationship is becoming very close, very sensual. Nothing really has happened outside of a little hand touch here or there. Very Pride and Prejudice, which is quite shocking to me. It's a good time. They end up getting into a fight once again because she thinks that they're lying and thinks that they're trying to tell her not to do things. And it becomes Fire Night, and she is told to stay indoors. She ends up not staying indoors, however, and she ends up sneaking out because the drums are too alluring. I'm assuming this is because of fairy lore in general, such as food and or music and things that can be played are easier lures for humans to find because they're so divine, because fairies have such a different speed that they can go at. Their food can be made with such different things that it's intoxicating, almost like drugs to humans, and that's very common in a lot of other fairy novels that I read, and so I'm assuming that's why she was so drawn to the drums to the point where she could not sleep, and that was like the biggest thing taking her to here. I don't think she had any desire to go there, and then she did. She ends up being assaulted and then saved by a man in dark who she pronounces singing for me was the most beautiful man I've ever seen. He ends up becoming quite a bit of a predator as well. He is also a fairy. He's not from the Spring Court. I have a few ideas of who this could be. One in particular, just because it's a name that pops up so constantly with these series. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm putting my theory out there. This is Rysand. I don't know what Rysand looks like, but that's my best guess. I also don't know if he's in this book. There is a pronunciation guide. He sure is in this book. Rysand. We technically have not met him yet. Just to put that out there. Supposedly. That's who I'm best guess is this. Illusions of finding her, taking her back. He explains what the actual ritual is that they have to do, and that is that all the magic goes in, dark magic, good magic, whole 9 yards, goes into Tamlin, and then he ends up having to go find a mate to go fuck and viciously fuck, and then the whole world is good for a year. Which is such an interesting ritual, but like, you do you. Lucian believes that he would take her, or would take Freya, but it wouldn't be the way that she would want, which was a good little zinger. That he would be able to smell her and be upset, which, once again, I did not agree with. I don't have anything else marked past this point, I don't think. It does not look like so. Past this point, they have another interaction in the hallway about 2 a.m. of that night. He did take a woman, and she calls him a whore and a pig, but they also have like this moment where he bites her, and she likes it, kinda. It feels very mixed in consent, and then they have like a funny like little thing. I really like the little split that afterwards at dinner. Or at breakfast and stuff. And overall, that is where I left off. About halfway through the novel is where we're at. I will update you, I don't know, after today's reading. I guess that's how we're doing this. And we'll have a bigger update to give because I'm going to try to read the next like 50 or so pages before I sit down to update you guys. But I do want to mention that they had sex. It was quite quick, which was shocking for a Sarah book, but they did have sex. I was correct on my prediction that it was who I thought it was. So, interesting. We have over 100 pages worth of updates for you, and we'll get into it. We're going from this point of the book, like we're reading a whole chunk of it together today. So, starting out in chapter 23, I will take some time, so editing Jacob, I am sorry, but it's going to be pauses, so it should be better. So, starting with chapter 23, they are pretty much smitten for one another. He's accepted her into his court. She has accepted him into her heart, essentially, and he is now wanting to show her the world that he has been keeping under the glamour. And so he says he can't. She says she wants to see it, and she's blown away by the world that she's never been able to see before. And it changes their entire perspective. Like, it changes her entire way she looks at fairies, at everything. It was a beautiful sequence. Then one of the things that came from this is that he glamored almost everybody at the house. All the guards. She had common questions about this throughout the majority of the beginning of the novel, but then slowly dropped it. And it's because they were all fairies and he didn't want to scare her, and so they were all glamored. And now they're not glamored anymore, and so she could see everybody. And that was like a big thing. Also seeing Alias for the first time in their natural form as well was also a big thing. Going down, seeing, she had already seen Tamlin in his natural form, seeing Lucian in the form that she had pictured him in. It's also talked about. They found a head outside in the garden one morning. They realized that it's from the Night Court, so keep a pause on that because they will come back. Page 229, they had their first kiss. I think I had marked something about them fucking for the first time. We'll get there. They had their first kiss on page 229. She was drunk, but loved it. And then Rysand shows up, threatens, does the whole 9 yards. Lucian ends up glamoring her to the wall. She ends up realizing that's not gonna work. That's like what this section is about. If I highlight anything else, I'll read like passages from the story. But essentially we learn that Ryzan is like Amritara's like second-hand person, is her lover in the Night Court, and things along those lines. This is a common character talked about in the series, and so I'm curious to see why, and if it's just because of how torturous he is. She also is asked for a name because she's, he does realize that's who, they have a guest, and the name that she gives him is Claire Beador, which was something she knew beforehand. She talks about his magic being an assault onto her body, which I thought was an interesting way of phrasing it, and so I wanted to keep note of it. Moving on to chapter 27, 244, we actually learn the name of the queen, which is Amarath. That was through a conversation between her and Tamlin after this experience. Jumping ahead quite a few pages, 252. No, let's back up a little bit because, so he ends up sending her away. We have to talk about that period. They have sex, they say each other, they love each other, but she won't say it back. For some reason, something is holding her back, so she will not say it back, which, we eventually know is bad. She won't say it back, and he's like, I have to leave you away, you have to go. Everybody's pissed off that he's having her leave. I understand why, especially now that we understand why, but everybody's pissed off, and so she ends up going back, and she ends up realizing everything he did right for her, everything he did right for her family, which we'll get into. I think I marked a few of those places. Yeah, one of the first things that she takes note of is the fact that there are letters that were sent to her. So on page 253, it says, oh, you'll never believe, almost a week after you went to care for Aunt Ripley, some stranger appeared to our door and asked Father to invest his money for him. Father was hesitant because the author was so good, but the stranger insisted, so Father did it. He gave us a trunk full of gold for agreeing within a month. He's doubled the man's investment, and then the money started pouring in, and that was obviously Tamlin or Lucian, one of the people he sent back, and then they soon realized that she's also rich and filled with trunks. The only person who's not excited to see her is Nesta, which we'll realize very quickly why the answer to that question is. Also, I like the little remark here about her ex-lover and how human he is. I keep reading all these romance novels where they're falling in love with like inanimate objects, or I'll link the video, and in all of those novels is remarked at the end that they are sad that they're no longer that object, and I found this to be quite the same. Very funny. It's also very true to Beauty and the Beast, as that, iconic shot, which I'll put on the screen. Maybe I'll put a gift of it, of her realizing that he's never going to be the Beast again, and she fell in love with the Beast. She didn't fall in love with the man. That's what that gave me. That's the vibe. So maybe that was its way of making a nod to it. So, next thing we know is that Nessa ended up being able to shield herself from the glamour, and so she's known all along. She went and she fought for her. She tried to go to her. She tried to go back and try to go into the fairyland. She could not accomplish any of this stuff, and that is the reason why she's been so off, because Freya has been told she has to commit to this lie. If you don't commit to this lie, your whole family's going to die. They're going to come, they're going to torture you all. It's going to be horrible, so you have to make them believe. Even if they feel like there's something off, you have to commit to this lie. And so that's the reason why Nessa's been so hush-hush about it. She told her the whole entire story, and then she had asked why the person she was supposed to marry is no longer going to be marrying her. And she said, because he would never have came after you. And I just really like that, because Nessa's always been one of the characters that seems really off to me. But am I not mistaken? That is what this one is about, right? The fifth one? That's the next series. It's Nessa's story. I want to say that's the person she companioned off to, which I'm not mad about. And she talks about, when she... I guess we're not there yet. Hold on. Let me get there. Then we hear about Claire. They burned their house with everybody inside except Claire. The body was never found. That will come back up later, so just take note of it. She ends up leaving to go find Tamlin due to this horrible thing that's going on. We're about to get a bunch of info dumping, so just be prepared. And she ends up telling Nesta, if I ever can come back, I will come back and I will bring you into my world. And Nesta makes the remark, I don't think I'll ever like fairies. And I feel like that's a perfect setup for a sequel series, even if it happens 10 or 12 years after this book came out. I don't know when this book came out, maybe 2016. So maybe like 6 or 7 years after this book came out. So we also learn about the story of Amarath is the queen that she is, what the problem was. Her little brother, Jarian, fell in love with a mortal, and she was really pissed off about this, and so she tortured and murdered the mortal, and then they got into a whole war, and they killed each other, and then we will soon learn who won that. Obviously Amarath won that, but she was super pissed off about this, and so they made a treaty, which is stripped. So that was one of the remarks. Then we actually start talking about the curse. So obviously there's a curse put on him. They couldn't talk about the curse. The curse is now over, and so they can talk about the curse now. They were, it's the same thing like Beauty and the Beast. They cannot talk about the curse in the castle. It's a whole thing, right? She explains what the curse means and what it was, and she says, if he wanted to break the curse, he will only need to find a human girl willing to marry him, but not any girl, a human with her eyes heart and with hatred for our kind, a human girl willing to kill a fairy. In which she did. He ended up sending one of his men, which is why he just stood there for the murder. The treaty was never her thing. She could have went home. He kidnapped her to fall in love with her. The whole thing. It's basically Beauty and the Beast. A little bit more violent, but essentially you understand the story. When she got sent away, it was 3 days prior to the events, and all she had to do was say I love you, and she just could not commit. And so she feels like this is her thing. We also learned that the life going around Prithian is not the life itself, it's just her. And so she believes that she needs to go stop it. And so that's what she does. I like a lot of Alias and stuff. I think Alias is a great companion character and stuff. I'm very happy to see. Hopefully there's more of this character later on because I enjoy them so much. We end up finding the Ardor, and then we end up going to the throne because she ends up getting thrown to the throne by the Ardor, remarked with red gold hair. I'm assuming that's who this is. Just so interesting to put your person who's the bad guy on the cover, but I don't get Freya vibes from the cover. I've never gotten Freya vibes from the cover whatsoever. So she had a few rules to remember when going in here into this place that they're at, which is in a mountain. Don't drink the wine, which was a whole thing. Don't make deals with anyone else until your life depends on it. Even then, consider whether it's worth it. And most of all, don't trust a soul in there, not even your damn one. And then she also remarks that there's one part of the curse that we've not heard about whatsoever, and she still cannot talk about, and so that is still being hidden from everybody. All right, now we can go in there. Now we can talk about the bargain that is made. The bargain that was made is you complete 3 tasks of my choosing. 3 tasks prove how deep a human sense of loyalty and love runs, and Tamlin is yours. Just 3 little challenges for your dedication to prove me, darling Druin, who is on her finger and also in her, she kept an eyeball and she kept a finger of him, so he's forever alive with her, which is quite torturous, but that's very true to, I would say, who she was. Then Freya, knowing that she's going in here, knowing that she has to bargain in order for this to work, she starts to bargain, and she says, his curse needs to be broken, everybody needs to be let free, everybody can go home, all these different things, making it very clean, cut, and dry that these are my agreements, I need this to happen. This eventually gets in her head about it, but that's essentially what she does. And one of those things she says, if you can solve a riddle, we can let you guys all go right now. Whatever that riddle might mean. I could not figure it out, but a riddle is a fantasy staple, apparently. She obviously agrees to this because she sees Tim's eyes widen, and she knows that he still loves her, and so she cannot not stop fighting. They end up beating her to a bloody pulp. Lucian ends up coming in and saving her and fixing her face to the point where it's not obvious, but also to a point where it's obvious. And then I think the last thing I remarked was the actual poem. She is brought in front. Lucian is tortured so they could get her name, and she is given a poem. I'll read the poem of such, or I guess not a poem, a riddle. It's the same thing. There are those who seek a lifetime, but never we meet, and those I kiss, but who trample beneath my ungrateful feet. At times I seem to favor the clever and the fair, but I bless all those who brave not the dare. By large, my minstrels are soft-handed and sweet. By scorn I become a difficult beast to defeat, for though each of my strikes land a powerful blow, when I kill I do it slow. Which is so interesting because my brain thought maybe it was Tamlin who she's talking about, but I'm not entirely sure. So I'll get back to you. I might have the answer before I answer you, but is that the last thing? I think that's the last thing. I met her first class. The way the rest of the book is going to go, I have the next one set about 50 pages for the end of the book. If there's enough stuff to talk about by then, we'll talk about it. If not, I'll update you at the end. Want to mention, I'm doing this book differently, just because I wasn't really sure how much I'd talk about, because we all know I've already read it. I talked about that in the intro. What's going forward will probably more in the lines, but actual what I did with Throne of Glass. But for at least the first one, we're doing big long updates. Hopefully that's not annoying. I promise you we'll get back into the normal swing of things. Once I don't remember the book very well, I remember this ending so clearly. So I don't really think I'll have much to add, except for whatever the fuck this means. But yeah. We are sitting on page 318. Which is her first trial. That's where we left off. That's right. 318 is her first trial. She ends up going against this worm, is what it is. It was a giant worm. She's hunting it. She ends up killing it with spikes in the ground. And she's like landing on a wall, and it goes into the spikes that she had created from the bones of the previousness of it. You create a stepping stool, is what I marked. I'm keeping note of all the things between her and Maurice. There's a lot of different ways to pronounce this word, apparently. One of those is that like they had like a mocking in this first trial, so we'll keep note of that for later on. She ends up getting really injured with her arm, like having like a very brutal and violent time. And also take note that almost everybody in her court, except for one person, is voting against her to die in all these. That person being Rysand. I do have a theory, but I can't remember. That's because I know what happens, and so my brain's trying to be like, this is obviously what happens, Jacob, but like I can't remember exactly. I feel like he's trying to overthrow her. Some of the things that he ends up deciding to do as we progress. So he ends up coming into her cell after the first one. Like I said, it's a very gruesome injury that she had gotten, so he ends up coming in to heal it, but with a bargain to come stay with him 2 weeks out of every month for the rest of her life, or he wouldn't do it. She eventually does give in, bargaining it down to a single week instead of 2 weeks. And so it's a week of her life every month for the rest of her life, and she has to stay at the night court. Lucian later on said something along the lines of, we'll see if it ends up actually happening. Somehow I feel like it's possible they end up together. I don't know if that's true or not. I would be curious. I vaguely remember how the next book begins, but I'm curious to see where this is going. So, a part of this deal, he ends up taking her and showing her around court. Getting her drunk every night and dressing her in paint is essentially what she is dressed in. So after that, she is given a few tasks to do. One of those is to clean lentils from Rysand's fireplace. And they end up having a conversation. One of the interesting conversation is the fact that one of the things that is apparent is that he lied to her about Claire, which we talked about, and she's trying to figure out the reason why he's doing this. Also, interestingly enough, he can turn into a bird, like some type of bird, when he's fully able to turn into a bird. Rather than turn into like a wolf type of thing, he can turn into a bird. And my only thing about birds is that there's another character I don't want to spoil who pops up in another series of hers, series over there, that can also turn into a bird, and that ends up being a love interest, even though like she had like 3 other love interests before him. I know that Sarah J. Maas's way of writing, especially for love, even though like I feel Tamlin and hers love so much, but I know that like her way of writing for love is to do it in a way of like however the characters tell her. So she ends up with Rysand at the end, which I would say it's highly possible. I would even say Lucian is possible at this point, even though I don't really feel it. I'm happy that he's still alive. I could see it happening because I could see her seeing like Freya maybe wanted her to go down this pathway. That is something to take note of. He gets her out of household chores. He finally gets her meals. Like he becomes her like her little, whatever you want to call it, which is interesting. It's an interesting development in that relationship, and I think it's important for viewer. Then she is taken to parties because of him. She is dressed in paint to really showcase that tattoo. She's also dressed in nothing but like a few linen laps and things. And then she is given the wine. Tamlin is shown that, there's this debt to be paid. And this is basically what she does. He has her dance at these parties for nights and nights on end, and then he like touches her sides or whatever, which is very not great, very unconsensual, but that's also something very true to the genre that we're in. And so I think that's also something else I need to keep in mind as I read this romantasy novel. These are what's very true in romantasy, especially in characters like this. And so I'm not going to write it off as like, I'm writing it off as like, ew, gross, for obvious reasons, but I'm also not writing it off as he's not impossible to be a love interest. Another thing is that Tamlin is keeping quiet for her safety. He doesn't want to give Amarath any knowledge about what could be going on, because she ends up having this conversation with Lucian. Lucian basically says on her little lines of like, why didn't you wait for me before you took this thing? And she said, I was dying, you were not there. That's because he had suffered 20 whips, and Amarath was using her powers to make it so he had to feel it every night. The wounds would continue to open, they'd never close fully. Then we get to the second task. The second task is a riddle where she has to pick lovers between 1, 2, and 3. Which is fine. It's a fine task. She cannot read. Amarath does not know this information. Rysand is the reason why she ends up being able to choose the third one, because of the eye, the tattoo that he gave her to showcase that it was, she's his. That I did find interesting and intriguing, but that is something that did happen. Then he was crying because there's so much pain, and also with Tamlin, he directed her to go back in certain ways, which I actually kind of found was hot. I hate to say it. And then he ends up visiting her. They end up talking about her not being able to read. He makes a joke about it, which I truly do think is a joke. I don't think he's going to punish her and make her do horrible things when she gets to the night court eventually. It's also very interesting that she agreed to do this in the night court. And he's not allowed to leave the place that they're in. That's also something else to keep note of. The final line on page 369 on the end of chapter 40 is, "It took me a long while to realize that Ryzan, whether he knew it or not, had effectively kept me from shattering completely." This eventually, I kind of changes. Like, she doesn't shatter completely right there, and then she does shatter because of everything, and she just gives in. She thinks she's going to die. She has no hope left. Then the Ardor and somebody else is walking and talking about King of Hybern. We don't know who this other person is, but I did want to take note of it just because we have no idea what that will come back and do. Basically, this entire section, these last like 60 or 70 pages that I read for you, was me speculating what is his character. I heard so much about this character. Some people love him, some people absolutely hate him, and I've been trying to figure it out, and I don't know where I stand. That's where I'm at. I'll update you when I finish the book, which is in the next 30 minutes. Time to close out A Court of Thorns and Roses. I do have some things that are marked not minty. It kind of worked out how I was thinking it would work out, so, and that's the reason why I very much remembered the big things, the big shockers, I think would cause a bigger reaction out of me. But they didn't cause a bigger reaction out of me because, once again, I remembered them. Start out with her and Tamlin having a first interaction together. They end up going off to try to fuck in Cubby. She ends up being assaulted by Ryzan in the same exact scene. It's crazy. Literally, not even like 5 seconds later. That's for Amarath's sake, but she was assaulted. He calls them both fools, and that type of thing. We'll get more information about it later. Not really important. Amarath did eventually show up. Some other things we learned, that she can't use all the power she keeps on hold, which I thought was interesting. And we also learned that my distinction was right, that he is after betraying her, and he does believe that as soon as Freya breaks the curse, whatever way that might be, it would automatically kill her because of the fury that Tamlin would have inside him. Also, something else to take note of on 385, we have an exchange between Ryzan and Freya. "When you healed my arm, you didn't need a bargain with me. You could have damned every single week of the year." My brows knit together as he turned already half consumed by the dog. "Every single week," and I would have said yes. It wasn't entirely a question, but I needed the answer. As my eyes pronounced his lips, "I know," he said, and vanished. Which I thought was really interesting and really intriguing and kind of flirting. A little cheaty there. Sweetie. Then we also have her final task. Her final task is she needs to kill 3 fairies with ash knives in order to accomplish this goal, and then he'll be set free. Obviously, the trick of this task is that she kills the first 2. This, I'm assuming, will become a huge part of the sequel, because there's nothing really here except for her feeling horrible about it. And then it would be Tamlin at the very end. It was a boy and a girl. Both had weeping from the crowd, saying that they were probably from a court and nearby. And then Tamlin was at the very, very end. And then she starts to figure out that there's a second part of this oath that no one is, like, they're not going to tell her whatever that might mean. And she starts to try to wonder what that oath might be as she is put with this daunting task of killing the person she loves. And then she realizes that everybody around her, in the times that she would overhear them talking about Amarath, she wouldn't do anything that would disadvantage her. Her brain automatically starts to think, okay, if I kill him, that's what she wants. She wants Tamlin, so she wouldn't have me kill him. So she is either bargaining and saying, I'm going to just say no, or there's something more. And then she comes to the line that's been said a few times throughout this novel: "For someone with a heart of stone, yours is certainly soft these days." And so she takes it upon herself to trust that he has a heart of actual stone, and then stabs him in it, because it's not love unless you stab your person, even if they do have a heart of stone. He doesn't. He has a heart of stone. It's true. Amarath once again gets pissed off with her figuring this out and throws her right against the walls and everything else. And so she has and then Ryzen steps in, and everybody gets mad at Amarath. Everybody's like, you told her that she'd be free, and so everybody's like turning on Amarath, which is kind of fun. Won't lie. Love a mutiny. And eventually, she actually learns what the answer to the riddle is. She's going through all these different things of the riddle, and she learns that the answer is love, and Tamlin's mask falls. And, murder. Murder ensues. A good murder. She is dead on the floor, and she is in somebody else's eyes. We soon realize it's Ryzen's eyes. Then they have this little action sequence, which I thought was a medium. It was maybe even less than medium. Nothing to the extent of the amazingness of Throne Glass. If you want, still, I would have to say, and this is a declaration, one of the best action sequences I've ever read is in that book. I think about it daily. I hate to say it. I do. I really do. And it's fucking phenomenal. And then they kill Amarath. Tamlin does by slicing her throat, and she is dead. And then on page 406, it says, "For what she gave, Ryzen said, will bestow what our oppressors I granted you before." He paused. "This makes us even." And then something falls inside her. She wakes, realizing that she is alive and that she is now High Fae. This is something I knew going into this book, because I very much remember her becoming High Fae, because I won't lie, I would say that's the most intriguing aspect of the sequel. Other than the fact that I know the sequel is lauded to be one of the best sequels of all time, other than that, which I did know going into it, part of the reason why I've never read it is because of the hype around it and me being so afraid that I'd hate it. It's also the fact that she is now High Fae. It's super intriguing. She does not enjoy any aspect of her being High Fae, I will have to mention, whatsoever. Not the sex, nothing, because she's just constantly thinking about this murder that she had to do at the very end of this book, which I feel like will continue to haunt her, and probably is the thing that, if I had to guess anything, would drive a wedge. Because I have to say, once the mask is off, and in true Beauty and Beast fashion, it didn't actually seem like she cared for him that much. I mean, logically, I guess she probably did, but like, it didn't really seem like it. And then she has this conversation with Rising at the end, where it seemed like she maybe had more chemistry, and I'm just like, I see you, but like, I don't know who I'm supposed to believe in, or who I want her to be with, because I was on the wrong end of the spectrum with Throne of Glass, until I wasn't. And I was like, oh, there's only one perfect person. I don't know. I didn't like the line of, "I didn't want you to fight alone or die alone." This is something that Ryzen says to her before he ends up disappearing. But also, would like to take note, there is something a little at the end here. His eyes locked on mine, wide and wild, his nostrils flared, shock, pure shock flashed across his features at whatever he saw on my face, and he stumbled back a step, actually stumbled. "What is," I began. He disappeared and simply disappeared, not shot on sight. Never explained what it is, so that's also intriguing and why I would want to read the sequel. If everything goes as planned, I am giving myself at least a month to read the sequel, not to like get the video out, whole 9 yards. With that being said though, I read A Court of Thorns and Roses. It's gonna get a 4. I don't think it's amazing, I don't think it's horrible, it's definitely is a true Beauty and Beast retelling, and so I'm really curious to see where the story goes once we're past this thing, especially now that like I see it so clearly, like it's so egregiously Beauty and the Beast. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I know this is an extremely popular series, and I'm very excited to read the sequels, as I've never read them before and I've heard such mixed things. I've heard one of the best sequels ever written, this is the novella before the new one, a book I should have ever written, which is so intriguing, because like I feel like outside of like Tower of Dawn, right, like everybody loves all the Throne of Glass books, right? Or is that just me? I don't know. Either way, this is A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.